Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021, and today is officially Election Day. Voters in Virginia and across the nation will go to their ballot boxes and decide whether or not they will choose Glenn Youngkin, Terry McAuliffe, or the Libertarian nominee, Princess Blanding, as their next governor in this state. Now, Virginia is really a two-way race, and I was originally going to release this video yesterday, but decided to push it off into today before the polls actually closed. That way we could get a better prediction and just give me a little bit more time to actually sit on this decision about who I believe will be the next governor of the state of Virginia. Now, don't let me hold you up. If you truly only care about the prediction, you can get towards the end, but I want to actually give you a bit of a presentation style video in order for you to understand it. I originally was going to use this in my traditional election day format, but I decided it would need a lot more explanation than what would be given just off of a simple video with that type of theme, so we are going to dive right into it. So the first thing that we need to note is the national approval rating of Joe Biden, and pretty much take a look at the way that this country overall disapproves of Joe Biden, and I want to specifically relate it to the state of Virginia. Now, the approval rating of the president right now is 43%. President Biden is underwater, and the disapproval rating is about 8 points over the approval rating nationwide. Now, these are based off numbers from FiveThirtyEight. They have released these that pretty much give you a good understanding about where the country stands, but in terms of the approval rating specifically in Virginia, surprisingly enough, Virginia disapproves of Joe Biden on average, according to these polls, by the same exact amount as the entire nation. And I would say that is a worrying sign, at least from an initial glance. And we'll talk about why this caused me to reflect on my decision and why there are very two equal outcomes that could come as a result of this race, but of course I will reach a decision by the end of this video. You can see the tracking over time, over the months from January through November. You can see from the beginning of January all the way until now, the approval rating has pretty much flipped flops. You can see that 53% of the nation compared to 34% in terms of the approval versus disapprove back in January is completely different from where it is today. Overall, in terms of overall net loss, Joe Biden lost a considerable amount of ground across the nation, and it's nothing that he could really make up in time for this election. As you can see, in fact, it got worse and worse and worse. So the approval rating today stands as its lowest point during the entire time of the presidency, and the disapproval rating now officially hits the majority of the nation disapproving of where Joe Biden stands on total issues across the nation. So you can see January through November. Then we can take a look at the Virginia governor polls. This orients a little bit more about, what actually has happened. In a very similar way that Joe Biden has fallen out of favor, the Virginia governor's race has moved away from from Democratic lead all the way to a Republican lead. As you can see, the Republicans now lead with 48% of the vote to 47%. Now, this is according to FiveThirtyEight, and this is the final polling average from this website. Back in August, when I actually started off with this tracker, you can see that 48% of the state supported Terry McAuliffe and just 42% supported Glenn Youngkin. Now, that leaves a lot of uncertainty, and sure, it may seem as if Terry McAuliffe has only lost a small amount of support, but the extreme surge in support for the Republican Party should be very alarming. In the matter of just 3 months, you saw the Republican Party go from the low 40s to defeating the Democratic Party in the near high 40s as well. So, all around here, I think that there is just a lot of interesting information when it comes down to these head-to-head polls, and they tell you a lot about how the trajectory of the race has rapidly changed and rapidly advanced for the Republican Party in such a short period of time. Now, in the state of Virginia, the polls will close at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, but do not expect a prediction there. I can widely expect and will widely tell you that you should look for a too early to call distinction in the state of Virginia or something of that stature. I think that what you are also going to be seeing, so you understand this straight off the bat, is that Republican counties count their ballots first. Not necessarily first, actually. They count their ballots a lot quicker because they have less people. In addition to that, if you take a look at election night coverage for a long-standing period of time in Virginia, for instance, most recently the 2020 presidential election, up until 12:05 a.m., the Republicans, Donald Trump specifically, led in Virginia. And the reason for that was because Northern Virginia took a much longer time at counting mail-in ballots. They recently passed a law that forced these ballots to be counted in at least 7 days before the election, or scanned in, so they would be able to be quickly dispersed by the time we reach election night. It's a lot more, I think that it'll hopefully go in a lot more eloquent fashion than it was in 2020, but I can still expect the Republican Republican counties to get in their vote report much earlier on, and you could start to see the Republican support. So when you see this too early to call distinction from CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, whatever it might be, just understand that the reason for that is simply because the Republicans are taking the advantage, and we really don't know how this race is going to go. But then sometime around later on, again, this is just a little bit of understanding as it stands today based off of various forecasting markets. You can see forecasting plus betting markets, you can see that the Republican chance of victory is around 65%. That was pretty much just me averaging out what I had seen. It's a little bit lower now today. I think that it has adjusted overnight, but pretty much that sentiment is the same. A lot of political forecasters agree that there is a higher chance of a Republican victory than there is a Democratic victory. In fact, more recently, this Battles Crystal Ball just moved the state of Virginia from lean Democrat to lean Republican. Didn't even leave it in that toss-up column. Made a final declaration and said lean Republican. So we'll see how that goes. In the governor's race, you can see the total here, 27. I'm assuming that New Jersey is going to the Democrats. I'm really not going to be too heavily focused on that race, but it certainly could be a surprising race if we do end up seeing it go red, but I don't think it will. I think Phil Murphy will be in a pretty strong position. Then by the time we reach, actually, I added this in last minute, so I forgot about that for just a moment. This is the swinging needle. Now, this is where I think we are going to see the New York Times come into play when it comes down to where they expect the race to go. I think earlier on, you should also expect the needle to not favor Democrats as much as it might later down the night. I think that you are going to see, with this strong surge in support the GOP will likely have earlier on, unless something has dramatically changed with the way Virginia has counted their ballots over the past decade, 2 decades even. I think that the Republican Party will likely start out with what seems to be an insurmountable lead that will inevitably narrow down. So the GOP probably will have a much higher chance of victory earlier on in the night than once we actually get Northern Virginia to report. And then by that point, it's just a waiting game to see if the turnout actually matched expectations, if the voter breakdown broke the way it did in 2020, or maybe it broke the way it did in 2004, 2009, even the last time a Republican won the governor's level in the state of Virginia. So we will see, but I will say that the Republicans also will still probably have that advantage earlier on. But then by the time we reach around 8 p.m. Eastern time, the distinction will change from too early to call with an hour of reports in with probably around 25% of the vote in to too close to call. It will be a very narrow race at this point in time, and the population centers will be counteracted by the other part of Virginia that is pretty much making this race super competitive. Northern Virginia is that sole driving factor as to why Virginia is going towards the left. And by this map, you will see that it will not change too much, but the chances have changed, and I think that's also something that you can expect to see on this swinging needle here. You can certainly expect to see the Democratic Party in a better position, but again, Republicans will have that advantage primarily because they already have that lead, and a lot of people are expecting the GOP to win. I think that with this last-minute surge in popularity for potentially a Democratic victory, that might prove to be the actual result. We have to wait and see, but as of right now, looking at the numbers that we can expect on election night, again, the GOP will still likely have that advantage unless something dramatically changes before tonight. So then moving on to the race projection. This is where I will finalize my personal understanding of the race and where I think it will go. And I think that before we get into this, I want you to completely understand that it is entirely possible for me to be wrong. This prediction, I will say, is probably the one I am least confident about the entirety of my YouTube channel. I have been making videos for over 4 years. I have never found a race more hard to predict than this individual race. I've made mistakes in the past. I've accurately predicted elections in the past. I got one of the runoffs wrong and I got one of them right in Georgia. You know, I missed 2 states in the 2020 presidential election, but got Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin correctly. You know, some things will work out and some things will not. And that's the point of this projection. This is not a set in stone thing. And also, I am one person. Completely understandable if you do not agree with me. I totally get that. There is no reason for us to not have that conversation and for you to not have a valid point. Every single one of your projections is totally valid and totally understandable. This is just where I personally will put the race. But I do want to say that I've had my last minute reservations. I've ultimately decided not to change the way that I predicted it from last night, but I added in 2 additional slides to talk about an alternative type of reality if something ends up that will be very contingent on what I'm about to present. But in my projection, as of last night, and as I've been sort of figuring out for the past week, I've spoke with a number of political pundits and people across different forms of media. I've spoken with people about this race individually, asking themselves, how do you think it's going to go? If they come from Virginia, if they've seen changes, I've spoken to friends who know Biden, Youngkin voters. I've spoken to people that have been working within this industry for decades now. So Glenn Youngkin specifically, I think, will be able to win this governor's race, and I think right now he is the favorite. I think that he will narrowly win this race, though you're not talking about a Republican blowout, but inevitably this will be a Republican victory if this is the final result, and it doesn't really matter the margin. The point being that this is a Biden plus 10 state and that McAuliffe ends up losing a race when he actually won the race under less beneficial circumstances back in 2013. I think a lot of this has to do with the education vote and the change in sentiment on President Trump. Terry McAuliffe has really drilled in that point of Youngkin being closely associated with Donald Trump, but that doesn't always work. Trying to utilize that as your sole campaign strategy isn't really that beneficial. Glenn Youngkin really kept this race down to a localized and statewide level versus Terry McAuliffe, who called in Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. He had people come in on the national stage. Sure, they're from DC, part of the DMV, whatever it might be. Still, they represent the National Democratic Party. Glenn Youngkin never campaigned with Donald Trump. Glenn Youngkin never pulled in people besides Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, and yes, they are very national figures, but they're not the incumbents. In addition to that, they are not as Trumpian as President Trump. And for Terry McAuliffe to try to cause this rift and to try to associate Youngkin with Trump, while initially I think worked, the fact that it was utilized so many times removed the relevance and the impact of such a statement. If all McAuliffe was saying is that Youngkin is Trump, Youngkin is the next Trump, Youngkin will bring Trump-era policies, think about how that sounds to a voter for 3-4 months at a time, versus Youngkin, who runs a primarily issue-based campaign. I'm going to change the way we approach education. I'm going to oppose critical race theory. Believe it or not, the majority of the state doesn't know what critical race theory is, but it's something that many of them oppose, and those who oppose it tend to side with Glenn Youngkin. All around here, I think that Glenn Youngkin just has the upper hand with the momentum going into Election Day. The polls in the state itself have dramatically shifted. You're talking about, quite literally, according to FiveThirtyEight, since August to now, a 9-point shift statewide. I think that there are certainly discrepancies within these polls, but the three most recent ones have also shown that Youngkin have taken the advantage. But this is not a 100% sure and solid prediction. This is where I think I should make the call based off of what I've seen so far, but I could 100% be wrong. And you guys are totally fair on calling me out on that if I am. I'm just saying, as it stands today, that Youngkin I expect to win against Terry McAuliffe, but again, I will bring up this point that it is entirely possible for another reality to happen. So this would be the governor's map if Youngkin was to win the race. It would be 28 Republican governors, that's in addition to what they have now, and 22 Democratic governors. This is where I think that the Democratic Party will be pretty upset with, knowing that they have less governorships. And I actually might be a little bit off on this one because Montana recently flipped red, but I also might not be. I counted the Democratic states there and got 22. I might not have counted correctly. I might have incorrectly characterized the state. Please correct me if I am wrong. But in any case, it's the point being not of the numbers changing dramatically, just an increase for Republicans overall across the United States in the RGA. And this is the reality I think that Democrats could see if they are to win this evening. I think it could go from anywhere from a 2-point victory for McAuliffe to a 3-point victory for Youngkin. The reason why I'm a little bit less inclined to say that McAuliffe is going to win again for all of the reasons I mentioned before, but I also think that this is a very real possibility. Some of these predictions have shown it 50-50, and I also think that is a completely valid point. I personally did not want to leave this race as a toss-up. I think that after weeks of me telling you guys that I was going to give you a finalized prediction, and all of a sudden I said, I'm not going to make a call on it. I mean, it's not a cop-out per se, but it is something that says, I do not want to take a side on this, and, I am willing to be wrong and also very willing to be right about this race itself. But McAuliffe definitely has a chance. I think that this is an entirely real possibility that McAuliffe wins against Glenn Youngkin. All it will take is just a little bit higher than expectations in terms of turnout in Northern Virginia. I expected Youngkin to win by less than a point. I also expect Terry McAuliffe to win by less than a point if he is to win this race. It will come down to the wire. I think that we might be wickedly surprised, and I think Democrats will be very happy about that. Or we could also be wickedly surprised in favor of the GOP. Either way, both parties are going to draw wild distinctions based off of this, and I think that is valid for the Republicans and not so much the Democrats. But again, we will assess that after the results tomorrow, and you will be the first to hear from me about my initial reaction and my future implications type of understanding about the Virginia election results. So As much as I'm saying now Youngkin could win, I could also be, completely wrong and McAuliffe could win this race. This is an entirely real thing. Again, this is my least confident prediction that I've made on the entirety of my channel. And I do want to say that if it does go either way, I will apologize for being wrong. If I'm wrong, I will, say, of course, that I was able to get it correctly if I was correct. But I do think that you should take my prediction and make your own conclusion and compare it by the end of the evening. Because at the end of the day, these predictions really have no impact on the final winner of the election, and they are just very interesting to make, but should not be binding in any type of scenario. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below and comment down what your prediction is in this Virginia gubernatorial election. It's going to be so important that this is a closely watched race. It really could tell us how 2022 and how potentially 2024 could go. I'm not one who likes to read too deep into elections, but this is an extremely important one in traditionally a Democratic state, and it will tell us a very big story for 2022 and beyond. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in tonight's live stream.